This is ChangeMakers with Katie Goar, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
Today, I have Dennis Shea with me, the Executive Director of the Ronald Terwilliger Center for Housing Policy. Dennis, you've been in this career for several years, and I am thrilled to have you and to hear what the Policy Center is doing. Some of your background, when I was researching this, you have had senior roles at HUD, you have had senior roles at the Office of U.S. Trade, and multiple bipartisan commissions. So thank you, first of all, for joining us on the ChangeMakers podcast.
It's great to be with you, Katie. I look forward to our discussion.
Let's go through, first of all, what your personal journey to affordable housing has been like. I know from some of my personal story, the commitment that each of us bring to affordable housing really helps ground us. So, would you mind starting us from that first point in how you've connected to affordable housing?
Well, I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a family of five, three kids, and a mom and dad. We lived in a relatively small home, probably about 1,500 square feet with one bathroom. So uh, both my parents worked, and when we're all going to school and getting off to work, it was a pretty crowded event around in the morning after breakfast as we try to get ourselves together. Um, so we lived in a modest home, but we lived in a really nice neighborhood. So we're in like the modest home in the really nice neighborhood with lots of families, and so I grew up with a lot of friends, kids everywhere, kids playing on the street. It was relatively safe. The school was down the street. And so it was really a wonderful place to grow up, Forest Hills, Queens, and lots of amenities around. So I really learned, the importance of place. Our home was modest, but we lived in a really great community. That has stuck with me throughout my entire life. That um, it's not just your home, it's actually where the home is located is very important. And that, at the Terwilliger Center here at BPC, we advocate for affordable housing that is affordable, but we're also emphasize the importance of where it's located, that it should be close to, transportation and employment opportunities and other amenities. So place is also very important.
It's one of those things when we talk about affordable housing, we're so focused on the provision of it or the access or that infamous intersection of supply and demand. But we also have the assumptions that having the stable home, like you mentioned, that is the ability to be able to launch people to better self-sufficiency. And I know you have a just a bookshelf of statistics and research that back that up. When you go out in the field to talk about and build bipartisan support, how do you convey that message of stability is good economic policy for the nation?
Well, I start by saying the obvious, right? That your home is shelter. It provides a basic necessity of life. But then, you make the point that it's also connected to good health, and it's also connected to academic achievement for children if they live in a affordable, stable home. And there's studies that show it. Also emphasize that. Um, it's incredibly important for upward mobility, if you're living in a community that has access to good schools and to employment opportunities and transportation that supports upward mobility. And then I also make the point that workers need to go where the jobs are. And if is no affordable housing or housing that is affordable near where the jobs are, that is a drag on economic growth. So access to housing that is affordable is critical to labor mobility, which in turn is critical to economic growth. And there's lots of statistics. Edward Glaser at Harvard has done a lot of research on this and others. So, when I make those points, I think people understand it. It just sounds like common sense to them. And you don't really need to spend a lot of time persuading people from any point on the political spectrum. That what you're saying kind of makes a lot of sense.
Mhm. We've had several guests on the podcast, couple from hospitals, developers who are working with hospitals, some schools, even Disney. And they have said that they want some stability for their employees. And they don't want them commuting an hour and a half one way. And so these employers have gotten into the space of providing affordable housing. So that really echoes what you're saying and what you're seeing in the industry as well.
Let me just add, Katie, we have a group of corporations that are working with us now. We've started a group called the Executive Council for Housing Affordability, and it's precisely the point that you're making. These are a group of companies that recognize that when they come to a community, they often have an imprint on the community and affect the housing market potentially in that community. But they also want to ensure that their workers, their employees have an adequate place to live. So we've trying to harness this group of companies to make that point to Congress, because that's our focus. It's a federal focus to uh, to promote housing affordability, make that connection between housing, affordable housing, and economic growth.
And that's something you're seeing across the nation. That's not something just isolated to major urban cities, correct?
Correct. It's every just about every community in the country is struggling with high housing costs, some more than others. But this problem used to be a coastal issue or a big city issue, but it's really affecting communities of urban, suburban, rural communities, blue states, red states. It's really impacting everybody.
Right now, affordable housing is on everybody's mind right now. It is really a topic of relevance. What are some of the most influential studies you think you and your team have put together to shed light on what's needed, what the current state is, and maybe some solutions that you're bringing? Are there a couple particular studies you want to highlight?
Well, I just would like to say, after Build Back Better, remember Build Back Better, which was in the Biden administration, there's a lot of funding for housing in there. A lot of people in the affordable housing advocacy community were concerned when that funding didn't materialize. But we put together, we said, we see the housing affordability challenge through three lenses: through the need for more supply to meet demand. We've underbuilt housing for since the Great Recession by millions of homes, both rental and starter homes. The need to preserve the existing stock of affordable homes, and the need to help families with demand side supports. They're going to be families, households whose incomes just don't match their housing costs, so they're going to need some assistance. So we're big supporters of the housing choice voucher program, but feel the program should be improved to make it more administratively easy for landlords, for example, to participate. So families can utilize their vouchers in the private rental market. But in each of these three lanes, supply, preservation, and demand side, we demonstrated that there was a lot of bipartisan support in Congress for initiatives, meaningful initiatives in each of these three lanes: supply, preservation, and demand side support. So we put them all together into a comprehensive package a few years ago, and we called it the American Housing Act. And we said to Congress, this is what you need to act on. This is bipartisan, nonpartisan. There's support in both parties for these things. So let's get this together. And we're seeing some of it, many of these ideas materializing, and we could discuss this, the Road to Housing Act, which passed out of the Senate Banking Committee unanimously, which is extraordinary in these divided times, and then passed the Senate uh, recently as part of what's called the National Defense Authorization Act. So I think one of the things I think we have done was to demonstrate that there is bipartisanship around a lot of initiatives that could meaningfully impact supply preservation and help for families who have lower incomes and need some assistance.
I've read that particular act that is on the horizon. Can you explain some of those deregulation points that are within that? There's been a lot of talk about how we can speed up development, and most often people want to know how can this be done faster? How can the pipeline move faster? And many people talk about deregulation as being part of that. And I know that particular act has some features that would do that. Could you give us a highlight of some of those?
Sure. I mean, for example, it removes the permanent chassis requirement from the HUD code for manufactured housing. Many manufactured homes are brought to their location and built on a put on a permanent foundation. So this chassis requirement is really not necessary. And I'm told it could eliminating that requirement could save $5,000 to $10,000 per manufactured home. And it's already an affordable source of housing. So could make it even more affordable. So that's one example. Improving the housing choice voucher program. A lot of landlords complain that they say well, I'm not part of the program because of the inspection process, that it's too complex. I have a mortgage to pay too, but I have to wait 5, 6, 7 weeks to put a family into my rental unit. That costs me. So it has some common sense things like if you've been inspected under a previous federal program, you can be over the past year. You don't need another inspection. You can get pre-inspected. If you're in a rural community, you can have a virtual inspection. So they tweak the process there to encourage greater landlord participation. But there are a number of provisions, if we have time, if I can go on, that are using access to federal funds to try to encourage local zoning and land use reform. So, for example, there's a $200 million innovation fund that says if you're a local community that has actually taken affirmative steps to promote more housing in your community through, zoning and land use reform, you can get access to these funds, and these funds can be used, very flexibly for not just housing, but for infrastructure and other things. So that's an example of trying to provide a carrot. The federal government provide a carrot to local and state governments to uh, change their policies. There are other things like tying federal transportation dollars. Like if you're an applicant for federal transportation dollars, if you promote housing near a transit project, you can get a bonus on your application. So tying transit with access to affordable housing. So these are some of the things that the bill attempts to do.
hmm I've even heard about the Davis Bacon wage determinations and trying to raise that unit count or at least streamline some of that, some of those regulations. Do you see that also making its way to the finish line?
Katie, that's not in the road to housing, but we have an advisory committee at the Terwilliger Center of very eminent individuals from both political parties, and some of them recently sent a letter to the White House earlier this week, actually, suggesting that affordable housing and LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit projects, be exempt from Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements because some research suggests that those add to the costs of housing, and there's also complications around the process of assessing what the prevailing wage, which impacts the timeline and such. So we recently have raised that issue. We raised it earlier this year with Secretary Bessent with respect to just LIHTC projects that, look at whether it makes sense to suspend LIHTC projects from prevailing wage determinations under Davis-Bacon.
So is it too early to tell whether whether that one is going to be changed or
I think it's too early to tell. Too early to tell at this point, but I think more and more people are beginning to talk about this issue. For example, on the environmental side, um, the road to housing um, exempts seeks to exempt affordable housing projects from NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, particularly infill related projects. Projects that are in the middle of an urban area that's already, it doesn't really make sense to do a environmental impact assessment in these infill sites. So that concept is in the road to housing. It's in the home um, bill, which Congressman Flood of Nebraska and Congressman Cleaver of Missouri introduced earlier this year to sort of so this and you saw Governor Newsom out in California endorsing the idea that affordable housing projects should be exempt from the California equivalent of the National Environmental Policy Act, CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, I believe. So there's a growing recognition that some of these regulatory policies, while well intentioned and maybe serving other legitimate public policy purposes with respect to affordable housing, may not be may need to be reconsidered.
this is more of a layman's type of a question, but I'm so curious with what you do. Are there things that are said to you that where people are just surprised about affordable housing? When you're trying to build consensus and collaboration, something that's either positive or negatively said that has impacted their viewpoint about affordable housing, and you're hearing that. Have you come across any types of zingers lately with people's views about affordable housing?
I mean, one line I like, which I've heard a couple of times, which I'm going to try to remember correctly, is uh, "Housing is where the jobs go at night." And that's so you need to have housing to to support employment and economic growth. Housing is where the jobs go at night. So I think that's a good one. People that resonates with people. But Katie, I have Ron Terwilliger. I work at the Terwilliger Center, and I've worked with Ron off and on for many years. And Ron used to call the housing. He was taught raising the alarm bells years ago on housing
Yep.
affordability, and he called it the silent crisis because policymakers weren't paying attention to it. The media wasn't paying attention to high housing costs, but now everybody's paying attention to it. You can't open the new. I still read the newspaper, but you can't go online anymore and not
Yep.
find a story about high housing costs. And Congress is reacting. So I think the zingers are maybe happening in the homes of some of the Congress people who are hearing from their children that they can't find a place to live that's affordable to them. And so I think it's really impacting a lot of people, the housing affordability challenge. And I think that's sort of the biggest reason why attitudes and the urgency around the issue have grown.
And Ron was definitely a pioneer, and he is a prophet of what was to come, because now we see that exact same thing playing out in real time right now. So my hope is that pushes us all to solution making faster, though, and that this is our chance to really get it right, despite being probably about 30 years too late in this game.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ron definitely is someone who's been raising the alarm bell. He looked at the demographic changes. He looked at supply years ago and said we're in for a hurting, and not in the not too distant future if we don't get this turned around. So you're right. He's been someone who's been talking about it for many years. Um, but there's a lot going on. I mean, I've been out in the country a little bit, and I see state governors are getting really involved in this, Katie. They all have plans. Many of them do. Uh, I, I was out in Utah and saw, as part of the National Housing Crisis Task Force, and met with Spencer Cox. He's been a leader of this issue. I mean, it's not, and it's bipartisan. It's You have people like
Yeah.
on the Republican side, Spencer Cox and Greg Gianforte of Montana, and others, and then you have people like Tina Kotek of Oregon on the Democratic side. Daniel McKee of Rhode Island is so it's really kind of a bipartisan issue. People realize that uh, it's a nonpartisan. People realize we need to get this right. Housing's so important; it's foundational.
So there used to be an acronym when the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, the RAD program, when it was first rolled out, there used to be a common reference. It was Republicans and Democrats were supporting the
Yeah,
RAD program. And I mean, we joke about it amongst in the industry, but we really are at a point of desperation as a nation. We're at a critical crossroads here to really make some impact. And so many of us are encouraged that there is true bipartisan solution making happening. But as we all know, it comes down to the details, and it comes down to people's ability to truly make things happen versus talk about things. So, what is giving you and the Bipartisan Policy Center, what is giving you guys hope in that arena?
well, I think again, most of our focus is federal. So we had, in the one big beautiful bill, we had one area of bipartisanship was the expansion of the low income housing tax credit. Federal support for the 9% credit was increased by 12%. And the bill also made it easier to utilize the 4% credits by lowering the private activity bond threshold. So, uh, experts estimate that could create 1.2 million additional new affordable rental homes over the next 10 years. So that was something we've been advocating for a long time, and we're very, thrilled that that was part of the package. Then the Road to Housing Act comes along, and literally this is it's I'm not you don't want to overstate the impact, but it of the legislation, but it is comprehensive. It is a recognition by Congress that we need to do something here, and it's totally bipartisan. And so we were very thrilled by the Senate acting on it, and the House has now got a different. They're working on the home bill, but now the negotiators. It's our understanding that there's a negotiation going on at this moment between the House Senate Banking Committee and the House Financial Services Committee to see what kind of package could be put into the National Defense Authorization Act. And it's our understanding that the timeline for the conclusion of this negotiation is relatively imminent. So we are looking at the smoke signals from Capitol Hill and seeing what comes out. But we're hopeful that that could pass. So this is exciting for us at the federal level. But again, we are also working with governors across the country. We're beginning to work with them to support and elevate their efforts, and more governors are getting involved. There seems to be a greater interest in sort of preemption, having sort of state level policies that kind of maybe perhaps preempt some local policies. Uh, Governors of both political parties are getting in this act, and then you have a lot of local communities are try are making changes. So I think the problem has become so severe that uh, action people are just responding. Policymakers are finally responding, and it's Katie. There's no single solution, and there's no magic wand. So it's going to be over a series of years, action at the federal level, action at the state level, action at the local community level, philanthropy being involved, private sector, as you mentioned earlier, being heavily involved. It's going to be kind of need an old hands on deck approach to solve this problem, which has built up over time. It won't be solved overnight. So, but I think we're beginning the process of trying to turn the ship around.
I'm glad you mentioned the local piece because that definitely is a factor to that where they can mobilize and not wait for the federal government, not wait for the state, but really drive their own solutions as well. But they have to have the access and the framework at the state and federal level to make that happen. Are there some specific highlights of cities or specific projects that you like to brag about and really highlight as best practices? I don't know if you're allowed to talk about favorites or it's like picking your favorite kid. Could you mention a few?
We on our website, we have done a series of short pieces highlighting reform efforts at the local level that we've liked. I mean, allowing manufactured housing in your community, like Jackson, Mississippi, or reducing parking minimum requirements in Buffalo, and Minneapolis has done a lot around single family zoning. So there are lots of examples. Really requires local leadership, requires a willingness to engage the community. um, I'm personally not one who likes to demonize anybody or demonize people who are against, the more housing, because they have their own reasons. So you need, they may say, this is my home is my single biggest investment. That's my retirement, and I don't want it to go down in value, which I get. That's a understandable sentiment. So we just need to continue talking to each other. We need to, continue to explain why this won't impact your property value. It might enhance your property value to have more housing. I mean, some affordable housing. Ron Terwilliger, for example, has supported an affordable housing development, which was partly LIHTC and multiple streams of funding, giving a preference to veterans in Arlington, in his former where he grew up. And someone asked me at an event when the groundbreaking, and how do you convince people that affordable housing is good in their community? And I said, just look at this place. I mean, this is a nice thing to have in your community. This project is really valuable to this community. So just look at it. So I again, it's a lot of intensity, trying to go to where people are, trying to understand their concerns, trying to respond to their concerns. But I think more and more people realize, their kids need to have housing. So we need to build more in places that people want to live. You know, could always build way out somewhere, and that's not really a place that many people would want to live. So it's, building more housing in places that provide opportunities and are connected to the rest of society.
I have to ask you this question because you've worked in so many diplomatic scenarios and settings. And I mean, you've even worked in Geneva. You've worked, obviously, with what you're doing in Congress and all the halls of importance. But if you could give three or four best practice tips on how to build collaboration in your community about housing. So, you're talking to somebody who maybe is up against the fight to build new housing, up against the fight to set aside certain zoning requirements. I mean, what are the tips and techniques for people who really want to build collaboration?
Well, that's a great question. I would say never write anybody off. Um, I mean, maybe you have to at some point, but don't go in writing anybody off. I think talking to people is incredibly important because you might uh, consider yourself a complete opposites of 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 an issue. But if you engage and talk and, in a respectful, civil manner, explain your position. If you come in with a disposition, I'm trying to find where the common ground is, I think you'll see that there's more you'll find yourself, the common ground will reveal itself. You'll find that you may have more in common than you initially thought, and that's a lot what we do at BPC. We bring people together from various perspectives and try to get them to talk to each other and try to find that common ground. So I think talking to people and just trying to understand what they want, what their concerns are, expressing what you want and what your concerns are, and then just you can more likely than not find that there's areas of common ground. And getting 100% is not always feasible. If you get 70% of what you're seeking, that's a win as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we have talked about a lot of things. Is there something that you would like to highlight that maybe we have missed?
For everyone who cares about access to housing and recognize its foundational importance, I think we just keep at it and with a smile and with a positive spirit.
I agree. It's can we sit and have coffee and talk about housing and put aside the differences because that seems to be the core bind that's going to bring us all together at some level, isn't it?
Absolutely, because everybody on housing, everybody gets it at a fun. Everybody realizes it's just you need a place to go at night to sleep, right? So, and you know that from your experience, and so everybody gets that. So that's a good foundation to start.
Again, I've been talking with Dennis Shea, the Executive Vice President and Chair of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Thank you, Katie. Great to be with you.
Thanks for listening to ChangeMakers with Katie Goar. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.